Welcome to the debate. Imagine someone just invented a teleportation device,
Okay.
right? So at first, everyone is amazed, but then, you look out at the harbor and see the global shipping industry. Thousands of massive Panamax cargo ships, sprawling port infrastructure, millions of jobs.
All built for a world that suddenly doesn't exist.
Exactly. Suddenly, those engineered steel behemoths aren't just facing like rough seas or a bad economic quarter. They are fundamentally, structurally irrelevant overnight. And that teleportation device, it has just been switched on for the global IT services sector. So today we are asking a critical question. Is the impending collapse of the Indian IT market an unstoppable macroeconomic shock, a technological force of nature no one could prevent? Or is it fundamentally a self-inflicted wound caused by chronic failures in leadership and a deeply ingrained lack of domestic innovation?
Right, and we are grounding this discussion in a rather provocative recent analysis by Anil Akhav, which honestly cuts right through the corporate PR. It sharply critiques the genuinely bleak reality facing the legacy IT industry today. I'll be arguing that this crisis is fundamentally a localized failure of leadership and innovation.
And I'll be taking the stance that the foundation of IT has irreversibly changed, that this is a systemic, global technological shock. I mean, artificial intelligence has stopped being just a neat tool that IT companies use to optimize their workflows, right? It has separated from them entirely. Akhav actually calls it a Frankenstein monster that has turned on its creators.
A monster they could have prepared for, but chose not to.
Well, we are seeing this play out in real time. Traditional IT models are inherently obsolete now, and this disruption is it's too massive to pin on local management failures.
See, I have to push back on the idea that this is just a natural disaster washing over helpless victims. I mean, come on. This crisis is fundamentally a localized failure. It is a story of stifled innovation, leadership myopia, and an industry that built a house of cards by actively refusing to evolve.
Refusing to evolve against a technological tidal wave?
Yes, the Indian IT sector was hopelessly exposed when the wind changed because they chose to prioritize short-term margins over actual intellectual property. They didn't just get hit by a storm, they actively dismantled their own roof before the rain started.
Look, let's look directly at the empirical data ACF presents, because it clearly illustrates a macro-level structural collapse. We aren't just talking about abstract theories of innovation here. We are talking about the financial reality of global giants. Take Accenture.
Okay, let's talk about Accenture.
ACV highlights their Q3 results, pointing out a 20 basis points expansion in their operating margin. Now, if you just glance at a balance sheet, a margin expansion looks like a win, right? You might think, oh, they are just operating more efficiently. But ACV immediately juxtaposes that with their forward revenue guidance.
Right.
Which is completely bleak.
Because that margin expansion is an illusion of health.
Exactly. But it's an illusion caused by the fundamental collapse of the demand cycle. A 20 basis point efficiency squeeze means absolutely nothing when the structural demand for your core service is just evaporating. Here is the mechanism at play, right? Traditional ID services operate on a bodies-in-seats model.
The billable hour.
Exactly. You bill by the hour for deploying thousands of engineers to do rote coding, maintenance, quality assurance testing. What happens when generative AI can instantly write that boilerplate code and automate the QA testing? The pipeline for massive, billable projects just dries up. Accenture is squeezing their existing workforce harder to maintain margins, but their forward indicators show a cliff drop in new revenue.
Right.
So if the problem was merely local Indian innovation, why is a global titan like Accenture showing such catastrophic forward indicators in their top and bottom lines?
Because even the giants are scrambling. Yes, but look at how these massive corporate entities are trying to justify that scramble. If this were simply a natural technological evolution, companies would explain it to their shareholders as exactly that, a transition period requiring reinvestment.
Sure.
They aren't doing that. Akhav points out the sheer absurdity of their corporate responses. These companies are blaming their poor results and weak margins on macroeconomic and geopolitical issues, throwing out excuses like the Iran-America war.
Which Akhav rightly dismisses as ridiculous.
Because absolutely no one believes it. I mean, ask yourself why a massive corporate entity would invent a geopolitical excuse for a missed quarter. It's because they are terrified of admitting the real underlying rot.
The rot being AI automating their jobs.
No, The rot being a desperate lack of internal IP, a failure to innovate over the last decade, and an utter lack of internal accountability. They're deflecting to global politics because they know they didn't do the work to build their own AI capabilities when capital was cheap. They were happy to collect revenues from labor arbitrage, paying an engineer in Bangalore a fraction of what an engineer in Silicon Valley costs.
Right.
And now that AI has driven the cost of that basic labor to near zero, their entire economic model is exposed as hollow.
Okay, the excuses they offer to the press might be absurd. I'll give you that. But the panic causing those excuses is driven by a systemic shock that is entirely out of their control. You're focusing on the PR spin, but the underlying reality is that the monster isn't just attacking the weak, it's attacking the strong.
Is it, though?
Yes. Akov draws a very deliberate contrast between the American IT companies, which he respectfully refers to as the banks of the industry, and the Indian firms, which he labels telecallers. Even these so-called banks are taking a severe hit from this AI Frankenstein. The rules of the global economy are being rewritten. You can't expect a legacy labor arbitrage model to survive a technological paradigm shift that essentially offers infinite, instantly scalable, cheap labor.
You're letting them off the hook. I mean, yes, AI offers infinitely scalable labor, but the Indian IT sector actively sabotaged its only chance to build a moat against that exact threat.
Sabotaged how? By not inventing ChatGPT first?
Let's talk about the specific historical window where this battle was lost. Akh zeroes in on the leadership crisis at Infosys as the ultimate proof of this self-sabotage. India actually had a chance to be far ahead in artificial intelligence. Former CEO Vishal Sikka saw this wave coming years ago. He understood that the era of simply throwing cheap human hours at a client's problem was ending.
So he tried to pivot.
He tried to pivot the company toward building AI platforms and proprietary software.
Right, he wanted to change the underlying business model.
Exactly. He wanted them to own the technology, not just rent out the labor. But instead of supporting that crucial pivot, he was pushed out by the founder, Narayana Murthy. And the reason Akh provides for this is just scathing. He says Murthy was distracted by legacy thinking, and according to the text, dreams of becoming president.
Wow.
Yeah. This wasn't a failure to predict the future. The future was sitting in their boardroom mapping out a survival strategy, and the old guard rejected it because it threatened their traditional fiefdoms. It proves that the impending crisis, these tears of blood Akh warns about, is a direct result of internal ego and poor strategic foresight. They actively suppressed innovation.
I completely reject the premise that keeping one visionary CEO would have magically saved an entire sprawling industry built on a dying economic model.
It would have given them a lifeboat.
A lifeboat in a tsunami? You are drastically underestimating the sheer velocity of the paradigm shift we are experiencing right now. Akov uses a brilliant analogy to describe the unprecedented pace of modern wealth and innovation that honestly makes your Infosys leadership point completely moot.
Okay, let's hear it.
He points out that Bill Gates, a man who practically defined the software revolution, spent his entire lifetime creating his wealth at Microsoft. Decades of compound growth and market dominance, right?
Sure.
Yet today, that entire lifetime of wealth creation is completely dwarfed by a single midday session rally of SpaceX stock.
The velocity of capital is terrifying, yes. But how does the speed of the market excuse a failure to even attempt to build a new engine?
Because it illustrates that we are operating in a world moving at SpaceX speed. Technological epochs have compressed from decades down to mere months. In a world moving that fast, keeping Vishal Sikka at Infosys wouldn't have saved a legacy cargo ship. You don't survive a SpaceX-level macro disruption just by having a slightly better captain.
So they should have just done nothing?
I'm saying the mechanics of the global economy transitioned to AI so rapidly that transitioning a workforce of hundreds of thousands of traditional coders into an elite AI research hub was a mathematical impossibility. The tidal wave was coming regardless. When the fundamental tools of civilization change overnight, which Akh describes as entering a new stone age, the old services instantly become cheap commodities. No boardroom decision was going to stop generative AI from separating from traditional IT and destroying the billable hour.
Okay, I understand this SpaceX analogy, and I agree that capital moves at a frightening speed today, but you are ignoring the difference between taking a hit and being entirely wiped out.
The whole industry is being wiped out.
The text gives us a dire warning about the ultimate fate of this industry, predicting tears of blood specifically for the Indian IT firms. And the financial ecosystem knows it, which is why Akhav cautions against believing the overly positive aha-oho brokerage reports flooding the market right now.
Well, those brokerage reports are exactly what I'm talking about. The institutional investors are trying to prop up the illusion of the old paradigm because the systemic collapse is so widespread. They are actively trying to mask a macro-level failure.
They are trying to mask the collapse. Yes, but we have to focus on the nature of the predicted demise that Akhav lays out. He warns that without innovation, these Indian IT firms are going to devolve into the equivalent of Kukatpally curry points.
It is a devastating metaphor.
It really is. For our listeners who might not be familiar with the term, a Kukatpally curry point refers to these highly commoditized, low-value, ubiquitous local food stalls found in Hyderabad. They sell basic meals at rock-bottom prices. They have no proprietary recipes, no brand loyalty, and absolutely no pricing power.
Just surviving on thin margins.
Right. They compete purely on volume and survival. But using this specific metaphor, Akukog is arguing that Indian IT isn't just feeling under the weight of a high-tech Frankenstein. They are being exposed for their total lack of intrinsic value.
I actually argue the curring point metaphor perfectly reinforces my macro argument.
How so?
Think about what happens when a highly advanced automation technology enters any industry. It commoditizes everything that isn't at the absolute cutting edge. The reason these multi-billion-dollar firms are becoming the equivalent of local food stalls isn't just because Narayana Murthy made a bad boardroom decision. It's because AI has democratized rote coding, but they could have been building the AI. 10 years ago, writing basic enterprise software required an army of engineers. Today, it requires a well-crafted prompt to an AI model. The new Stone Age is a massive reset of value. The market forces driving this, the exact forces wiping out Accenture's forward guidance, are global.
But Akhav's distinction between the telecaller and the bank is deeply intentional here. And it destroys the idea that this is just a universal flattening. A bank that takes a hit in a recession is still a bank.
It still bleeds money.
Yes, but it holds capital. It has structural leverage, it has risk models, and crucially, it owns its underlying assets. The American IT firms built moats of innovation. They own the operating systems, the cloud infrastructure, the foundational AI models. They are the banks.
And they are still losing revenue.
Yes, they take a hit because AI rewrites the rules of engagement. But a telecaller that takes a hit is out of a job entirely. The Indian firms built massive warehouses of cheap labor. They didn't build the cloud, they just provided the workers to migrate data into it. They didn't build the AI, they just provided the humans to label the training data.
Right. Labor arbitrage.
Exactly. So when an automation technology arrives that fundamentally replaces the human worker, the telecaller has no moat whatsoever. That is why they face tears of blood. They actively chose to prioritize dividends over R&D. They chose to remain telecallers. You cannot blame the teleportation device when you spent the last 20 years stubbornly refusing to build anything other than wooden boats.
Look, it is a profound vulnerability. I'll admit that. But the reality is that the wooden boats were highly profitable until the exact moment they weren't. You look at the empirical data Akhav presents, the margin pressures, the collapsed revenue guidance across the board, the terrifying velocity of capital illustrated by the SpaceX comparison. To me, it is undeniable that we are witnessing an unprecedented macroeconomic shock.
The shock is real, but the collapse was preventable.
I disagree. The sheer force of AI separating from traditional IT has created a tidal wave that no legacy labor model, no matter how well managed, could withstand. Generative AI didn't just iterate on the IT industry, it fundamentally broke the concept of the billable hour.
Well, the macroeconomic storm is very real, and it is incredibly violent. I don't deny that AI is rewriting the rules of human labor, but Akhav's analysis leaves us with a stark lesson about institutional foundation and accountability. Indian IT's lack of a sturdy foundation, born from an innovationless culture and historical leadership missteps, is what guarantees their specific, commoditized demise. They are facing a Category 5 hurricane in a house made of straw, and they have the audacity to blame geopolitics for the roof blowing off.
Which brings us to the core reality Akiv has exposed. Whether you view this primarily as the unstoppable, SpaceX-level velocity of AI rendering human labor obsolete, or as the fatal consequence of an industry that refused to innovate beyond the telecaller model, the conclusion is definitively grim.
Very grim. The separation of artificial intelligence from traditional information technology has created an irreversible paradigm shift. The old models are quite literally entering a new stone age, and no amount of corporate PR or AHO brokerage reports can hide the structural collapse underneath.
Absolutely. The market will no longer reward incrementalism, and the era of scaling a business simply by hiring 10,000 more graduates is permanently over. Right. It forces us to examine how global Frankensteins invariably find and exploit localized weaknesses. When a technology like AI drives the cost of your core service to zero, the foundation of your industry doesn't just crack, it vaporizes. It brings us back to that massive shipping harbor we started with. If the teleportation device is already turned on, you have to wonder, can any legacy industry, no matter how much mass and historical momentum it has, truly survive this new pace of innovation?
Or are they all just waiting to find out they've become cooked poly curry points?
A terrifying but essential thought. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.